Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 20th webinar in the Joint Transit webinar series, which will cover different projects related to micromobility policies and practices in the American transportation infrastructure from four quite different perspectives. Okay, today we're privileged to have 5 transportation experts presenting in this webinar. We will have 3 15 to 20-minute presentations. First, Professor Beth Ferguson will discuss integrating micromobility with public transit, a case study of the California Bay Area. After that, John Langford will present on universities as a model for public-private partnerships in micromobility. Then Dr. Joseph Schwitterman will present on key takeaways from partnerships between public transit providers and transportation network companies in the United States. And finally, Alexander Kopkov and Austin Cipiora will present on micromobility policies and practices at the state level. We'll save questions until the end of the 4 presentations for a 15-minute group Q&A. You can type your questions anytime throughout the session. And without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, Professor Beth Ferguson. One second. Professor Beth Ferguson is an urban designer whose work blends micromobility planning, active mobility, and sustainable transportation. She's an assistant professor and director of the Adapting City Lab at the University of California, Davis. She's working on a solar charging station for Oakland's MacArthur, BART Mobility Hub, and participated on Team Public Sediment for Alameda Creek during the Resilient by the Design Bay Area Challenge. Her interdisciplinary work has been exhibited at the Exploratory Museum, Dutch Design Week, and Ars Electronica. She's an Autodesk Technology Center Fellow and a former New Zealand 01 American Arts Incubator Fellow. Professor Ferguson, I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it. Let's see if I can share my slides.
Let me stop share.
Does that look okay?
Yes.
Great. Super. Okay. Thank you so much for this welcome. I look forward to the discussion and getting to know the work of the other panelists and receiving questions, but I'll dive right into it. So the recent work I've been doing with the University of California, Davis, and my research partner, Dr. Angela Sanguinetti, has been connecting micromobility with public transit in the San Francisco Bay Area as our focus. So just to kind of start, why are we wanting to think about low carbon mobility options for the last mile? A recent quote from the C40 Cities Mayors Network said, "Public transportation must double in cities over the next decade to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius target set by the Paris Agreement and prevent extreme climate change, the global weirding." So here in California, I'm in Northern California, we've just recently had really wild flooding. We've had to manage forest fires for years. I think public transit could really help us reduce our global emissions, but we need to make that infrastructure more readily available and easier for people. So that's kind of why I've been interested in shared micromobility and how it could connect neighborhoods as kind of a last mile. And when we say last mile, we mean, the 1 or 2 miles it takes people to walk to a bus stop or a train station in a city with that kind of level of public transit. So in around 2018, there was a lot of venture capitalist investment in shared micromobility. So that's a fleet of electric scooters, electric bikes that are shared. So you have a membership, almost like a membership, or you're a member, like a gym member, so you can pick and choose what vehicle you want to use and pay a rate, usually per minute or per use. So in the early days of micromobility, it might be, $2 to $3 for a ride. Since the global pandemic and since, the recession, some of these vehicle fleets have become more expensive. So that has become a bit of a barrier to use. But they also have programs for lower income communities, and cities are also kind of responding to that with some e-bike library systems, and then there's different states that are taking on rebates for people to buy their own personal e-bike or scooter. So this has definitely been a disruptive industry, but super exciting, and continues to go over bumps with the rest of us of how we're going to move around our cities in the future. So we started this research by looking at San Francisco, Berkeley, Emeryville, and Oakland to see what vehicle fleets are in different parts of the Bay Area. It's important for shared micromobility to be consistent, because if you pick up a vehicle and then try to go from Berkeley to Oakland, if the vehicle does not have service in one of those cities, you'd have to stop your ride in the zone of that city, and then maybe walk another mile to find another fleet option, or a bus or a train. So when we say active mobility, it is involving like walking, running, hunting down a shared e-bike or scooter, or hopping on a bus or a shuttle or a train. So giving people options, even car share, can help reduce kind of our addiction to gas vehicles, or even a need to have your own personal sofa driving around your city. So the lighter we are on our city streets, the more we have space for healthier mobility and connections. So before the pandemic, the city of San Francisco had much higher ridership of these fleets. An example in Oakland was, per shared scooter, it was used 3 trips per day. And now they're seeing rates more like 1.4 trips per day. So, we're crawling out of the pandemic, but now we have larger work from home sheds, and that is affecting public transit ridership on buses and trains, as well as micromobility. So some of the economic viability of these fleets is still quite stressed. But the shift I think we're hearing from cities is to consider them public transit and public good, and if they can be protected and invested, and reduce some of the fees involved in these operations, they could be accessible to more people. So how does shared micromobility connect with BART, which is the Bay Area Rapid Transit? If you've come to the San Francisco Bay Area, it's possible you've tried out BART. You can get from the Oakland Airport, the San Francisco Airport. It connects with Amtrak to go to Sacramento or San Jose. It's the lifeline of public transit to move across cities in the Bay. There's vehicle share systems managed by Lyft, the car share company. They've invested in the bike share and kind of underwriting the bike share and the e-bike share system that's only in San Francisco. The bike share is across these 4 cities that we've looked at. Some of the bike share are electric, and those are free floating, which mean they can go, they can be locked to a tree, or go into a neighborhood without a dock. We'll talk more about docks in a minute, but they can also be left, at the top of a staircase going into the train station, and that can be a nuisance for people, with accessibility issues. So that's why when we say disruptive, it's literally disrupted people's path walking through a city. But some of that is getting solved through the app design, through better behavior incentives. The Lyft company has incentivized a rider. You save $2 if you lock the bike to the kiosk that's in a designated neighborhood. So BART actually, in 2018, their bike managers had to quickly print out stickers and make kiosks or drop-off zones at their stations in Oakland and Berkeley to help manage these fleets that were kind of like surprising them and showing up. But here's an example of what a bike shared dock looks like. You can see the one on the left that's managed. It's called the Lyft Bay Wheels system. So they have both electric and non-electric, or the classic bikes. E-scooters there's companies trying to come up with kiosks for the e-scooters. So there's a few available on the market. And then, cities like Santa Monica have just created corrals or drop-off zones for neighborhoods to keep these vehicles off sidewalks, preventing people from, just walking a dog or getting from A to B. And that's been successful. So these are some kind of tactical urbanism options of how to manage your fleets so that they're agreeable with the neighbors. So insufficient bike racks is a problem in San Francisco, especially at the BART stations. A rider might want to reduce waiting for a bus and a train, so two different public transit options. So an e-scooter might save them time. So hopping on a scooter to get to a BART station might result in locking your scooter to the BART entrance, and then it becomes a tripping hazard. Before, you didn't have to lock your vehicle, and the city of Oakland and San Francisco has now enforced that the share systems have to rely on locking. And that has been very successful to reduce the scooters from ending up in Lake Merritt, which hundreds were ending up there. So having them locked to something does reduce how they can become junked or trashed, sadly. So there's been some success, but there are not enough bike racks on Market Street in San Francisco, so it can be still a nuisance of where to lock your shared vehicle as you run to catch a train. So we have visited 18 BART stations during rush hour in fall 2022. And we saw 129 shared micromobility vehicles that were either parked at a dock, outside on a bike rack, or on street furniture, such as a pole. So you can start to see where the stations had the most available shared vehicles, and the stations that were underserved and did not have a lot of available vehicles. You can see Fruitvale in the middle had 3 classic bikes available. It's a neighborhood in Oakland. Unfortunately, that neighborhood only has 2 docks that the classic bikes have to lock to, or maybe there's 3 or 4, but they're within a mile or half a mile from each other. So it's not truly an option for someone to get home if the docks are too close and not out in a neighborhood that would serve them. But there is some good news about Fruitvale that I'll show in a minute. The city centers, we have Embarcadero, Montgomery, so downtown San Francisco. That is where we counted the most amount of scooters, shared scooters and classic bikes and e-bikes in a dense downtown area. That's where tourists are, that's where these companies are going to make the most amount of money, but not necessarily serving neighbors that need to get from A to B and reduce dependency on gas cars. So I was really surprised by how many personal bikes and scooters that I saw on BART when we did this survey last fall. So there's fold-up scooters, there's scooters that don't fold, there's kick scooters, there's skateboards. So a lot of people are kind of taking micromobility into their own hands and purchasing their own vehicles, whether it's an electric bike, classic bike. So we saw hundreds, I think about 1,000 personal e-bikes and scooters that people were using to reduce waiting for a second bus as they get home or navigate to work. So of the 18 BART stations that we went to, Fruitvale was actually where we saw the highest amount of classic bikes, electric bikes, e-scooters, as people were kind of taking micromobility into their own hands to get home because that neighborhood did not have shared vehicles available. So I think that can be, if we're not paying attention to how people are solving the last mile for themselves, we might not be planning bike lanes or lockers for that neighborhood. So I think, people thought I was crazy getting out and actually just counting with the pencil. But some of our systems to count shared micromobility, the data dashboards are not accounting personal use of e-bikes and classic bikes. So I think that number should be accounted. So to kind of quickly show the halt that the pandemic caused, you can see in this graph from that BART supplied us in 2022. You can see the pink and red and yellow shows the high numbers of people using the lockers as well as locking rooms at a few of the BART stations across Oakland, Berkeley, and San Francisco. And at April 2022, people just stopped using bikes and really just stopped using public transit. So fast forward at the end of the chart, you can see these numbers are growing where people are again riding bikes and scooters. You can see one here in the picture using a locker room that's at the MacArthur BART station. We've surveyed micromobility and BART users, and we actually have some higher numbers we're adding to this research that will be published soon. We asked people what they needed, what strategies would help them feel safer to use micromobility with public transit. And I think the highest proposal was protected bike lanes, so they felt safe getting home from a transit stop. Also better access to shared bikes and scooters, better visibility, so more lighting around the bike pathways was some other things people requested. So we've also kind of painstakingly mapped what scooter and e-bikes are available in different cities. So you can see on the right, the pink is Oakland, yellow is Emeryville, orange is Berkeley. The vehicles provided in these different districts are different. So if you're trying to go from North Oakland to South Berkeley, a lot of the vehicles can't cross that city border. So coming up with ways to streamline how the vehicles can move around the city, as well as streamlining payments, is something that our surveys of stakeholders have kind of inspired us to really consider and put out there. So the last year and a half, I've participated in the Metropolitan Transportation Commission's Bay Area Mobility Hub, which has been a $3 million grant to help 8 different pilots around the city, ferries, trains, buses, really think about active mobility. So a mobility hub is a place in a community that brings together public transit, bike share, car share, and other ways for people to get where they want to go without a private vehicle. Our pilot has been the Oakland MacArthur BART. So we've been looking at counting like how the bike racks work, bike lockers, e-drop-off zones. There's a bike share system here. And we're thinking like future, could we start providing charging for the micromobility fleets or personal e-bikes as people are kind of coming from longer distances? So this pilot will be installed in the summer. We're working on different ways of doing off-grid solar to help reduce the electricity and show that solar micromobility could be possible in the future. And I've done this work in my past in Austin, Texas. This is the electric drive that I did for Austin Energy in 2017. We won the Austin Green Award, and it's a center for people to use free solar energy and charge personal bikes, and it's next to a bike fleet and part of Austin Energy's pilot of showing that electric and future solar mobility is possible. So thank you for allowing me to present, and be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Professor Ferguson. That was really interesting. We're going to leave questions for the end, as we mentioned, right at the end for the Q&A. But if anyone has any questions, you can write it down in the chat so that we can revisit them later. Okay. Now I will introduce the speaker of the second presentation, John Langford. Let me use 1 second. Oops. 1 second. I think I have to. Before, I have to share something before.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Okay, so John Lackford is a Senior Director of Partnership and Policy at Spin Inc., a San Francisco-based micromobility unit. Spin's mission is to make daily living more efficient and enjoyable by reducing barriers to transportation and improving access to the education, jobs, healthcare, and more through a world full of 15-minute cities. As one of the leading micromobility companies, Spin partners with local communities and governments to bring sustainable, affordable, and reliable e-scooter and e-bike programs to cities in North America and Europe. Okay, John, I will turn it over to you now.
Great. Thanks so much.
Stop share.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ferguson, for getting us started. That was really enjoyable, and I think dovetails nicely with what I'm going to present. So I manage the partnerships and policy team for Spin, which means our relationships with cities in North America, and lead our policy team as well. We're in like 60 or so cities and have about 20 university markets. And I'm new to this role. For the past few years, I was working on university partnerships, where I led our efforts to partner with universities. So I have a presentation today entitled Universities as a Model for Public-Private Partnerships in Micromobility. That sort of draws on some of those learnings, and my hope is that we can take some lessons from what works really well in universities to address some of the things that aren't working as well in cities. And there we go. So the way I sort of broke this down is the context for the presentation is really thinking about micromobility as a public-private partnership between private operators of shared bikes, scooters, and the other vehicles that are coming online now, and cities and universities. So sort of lay out that framing, then want to talk a little bit about specifically the micromobility context as a public-private partnership, and then share a little bit about sort of the campus framework that we have that's been working really well. So the first, just to like level set on public-private partnerships, I looked into this, and it turns out there's no like universally agreed upon definition of what a public-private partnership is. And I think it's one of the reasons I don't actually hear people talk about this, this framing in terms of micromobility as much as I think we should. But I really like this definition from the World Bank that says public-private partnerships are a mechanism for government to procure and implement public infrastructure and or services using the resources and expertise of the private sector. So when you think about that in terms of micromobility, like the way I think about this is that these private operators, Spin, Bird, Lime, Lyft, like we have brought speed, capital, and competition to really form this new industry that's focused on providing alternatives to cars for short trips, last mile solutions in dense urban areas. And that's sort of the private operator component. And then the public agency component is to provide oversight and regulation in the interest of residents and taxpayers. And then theoretically, like we all have the same goal, and what's good for the city should be good for the business. And I think that's sort of like the magic here. And we've seen some great examples of this in cities, but we also see some really terrible examples where sort of this framework is not acknowledged. And I think another way to think about this is like, in order for a public-private partnership to work, it has to work for public agency residents, but it also has to work for private operator, and there has to be a private business that can survive. But when you put those two things together and it's in everybody's interest, that's sort of where the magic is. So when we think about like what's been the upside of this public-private partnership, we see the sort of the growth of this industry and really the expansion of the availability of alternative modes of transportation. So this on the graph in the upper left, you see really 2010 was there was not much of an existence of a micromobility industry at all. And then in 2018, when scooters come on the screen, on the scene, and the VCs get involved, you really see explosive growth. And then moving over to the graph on the right, you really see that, like, you know, a huge number of cities in North America, now these programs are just a part of the city landscape to varying degrees. Two other points on this slide. One is, this is all coming from NACDO, by the way. This 36% of shared micromobility trips replace a car trip. I think we consistently see surveys that are in that, like, 1/3 of trips are replaced. A lot of it's based on survey data, so it's hard to totally know, totally understand that data, but it's still a huge amount. Removing 1/3 of car trips, you know, as a former bike advocate, before scooters and dockless bikes came onto the scene, like, you know, was sort of an unthinkable goal, and now we've just seen it sort of proliferate. And then if you look the bottom left here, we do see that a lot of the scooter trips, I think in particular, replaced walking trips, which, you know, isn't the greatest thing in the world, but not the worst thing in the world. But really, it's this taxi and ride share and single occupancy vehicle trips that I think where we have the biggest impact that adds up to that 1/3 of trips being replaced. So then I think if that's sort of the upside, that this industry has emerged that is really, you know, taking a dent out of single occupancy vehicle car trips, there's also some real challenges that are facing the industry. And Dr. Ferguson alluded to it, but like in 2018, this VC-backed growth-focused industry, you know, grows rapidly, that, you know, now is needing to achieve profitability. And as a result, like, you know, many companies in the tech industry, we're seeing layoffs, but not only layoffs, price increases for end users, which ultimately becomes an accessibility issue and works counterproductive to, you know, the goal of sort of being able to replace more of those car trips. A second point here is that there are regulatory frameworks that are driving up costs now that often get passed on to the consumers. Those regulatory costs are going up, and in accordance with that, the cost to end users is going up. When the industry started, it was $1 to unlock and 15 cents a minute for a scooter trip. And in San Francisco right now, across the board, I think it's close to 50 cents a minute. So it's really getting to the point where, from a price perspective, it's not a great alternative. And I think that's a real issue for us. And then the third point is, you know, there's really a car-centric and NIMBY, or not in my backyard, sentiment that creates political pushback and becomes counterproductive to really what stated city goals and operator goals are, which is, again, provide alternative transportation options. And I don't know if anybody saw this meme floating around LinkedIn like a month ago or something, but I just like it because I think it sort of sums up some of that sentiment, which is, you know, in completely car-dominated cities, you know, somehow a few hundred scooters, even when, you know, not parked or managed as well as they should be, you know, somehow becomes, you know, public enemy number one. And that's just not, you know, sort of a reasonable point of view, in my opinion. So switching to the campus, understanding the sort of campus use cases, like what can we learn from universities and these university markets that have really done well, that can sort of become best practices for the industry. So the first thing is, I think this is less of a best practice, but more just sort of a reality of what makes universities work really well, is the population density. You have over, you know, 100 universities in the US that are really these like large campus, 1.5 to 5 square miles. That's like 1,000 acres or more. with these big enrollments of 20,000 up to 50,000 students, and then large staff and faculty populations, and then, you know, businesses that cater to those, you really get this like really great population density. And then within that population density, because it's so dense, you know, walking, biking, riding scooters becomes a natural way of getting around, and the built environment has started to cater to that. So around these large universities, you see low speed limits, you see traffic calming measures, and these really high pedestrian populations that they want to make it safe for. And obviously we all know, we just saw on the slide that Dr. Ferguson presented, number one thing that riders want is safer infrastructure. But then the third component here is really interestingly, in our data, what we see is like most of our scooter markets, the ridership peaks on the weekends. And I think that's like more joyriding, it's more recreational. But what it tells us is that, like, you know, it's not become a commuter solution in the way we would have hoped. And at universities, it's the opposite. Ridership really, you know, falls off on the weekend. And we see peaks for the morning commute and the evening commute. And so in other words, like the micromobility is really integrated in being used as a transportation tool, not just for fun. You can see that in this, just a quick shot, this graph here, you can see Austin, Louisville, Portland, clear peaks on Saturdays and Sundays. This was across several different operators, but just sort of gives you a shot of that. So I tried to sort of draw out like that we have this campus framework that's emerged for us at Spin that I think offers great lessons. And I tried to sort of draw those out and be able to categorize those. And I see three buckets here: contractual, operational, and programmatic. And I'm going to jump into those. So the contractual factors, 4 components here that really sort of like sets the stage for the other 2. The first is that universities are much more likely to enter into an exclusive partnership. And that's obviously like great for a business that wants more market share. But it also, we've seen the dynamic in terms of the public-private partnership, in terms of forming a true partnership. It's just much different when there are 2 or 3 operators at the table versus one partner to deliver a micromobility service where you can sort of focus on long-term goals. You can build trust much easier. It enables increased investment from the operator. And it also drives down administrative costs for cities. This isn't necessarily the best solution for every city, because competition can be a good thing. But there are a lot of US cities where there have been 5, 6, 7 or more operators, open permit systems, we call them, and limiting the vendors, limited vendor models we're seeing more and more of it. But there's some real magic when you get to that exclusive partnership. And sort of dovetailing with that is the contract length. With proper protections in place, longer contracts allow for longer term investments, as well as the time to like work on more ambitious projects, because nobody's going to take on a project if there's a 6-month or 1-year pilot. And I think when we're talking about trying to like impact travel behavior or build a mobility hub, or have like, you know, allow adoption to occur over a longer period of time, these, you know, pilots are just not particularly useful. And I recognize there's certainly a place for them, but we need to start moving towards longer contracts, as a lot of pilots have been done. Revenue sharing would be a third one. And, you know, what we're seeing on the university side is we're coming up with really creative models that are ultimately about supporting our shared aims. So 2 examples of this are like, one is we will love to revenue share if we can put that into a joint research project, and we will fund research. We have a project called the Campuses Living Lab Project, and we'll fund faculty to use the university environment as a living lab and study the travel behavior, user preferences, all that. Faculty love it. It works well for us, but ultimately that's a revenue sharing arrangement. It's just one that works really well for both parties. And then we get great data out of it. It's an opportunity for thought leadership, and can help our business as well. Another great example of this is using revenue share to create ride subsidies to drive down prices for the end user, which is again ultimately in everybody's interest, because the point of doing this is to provide the alternative transportation options and make those accessible. And if we can drive down costs, we'd much rather provide a portion of revenue for that than be in an environment where, like, often we will call it like a pay to play environment, where literally like a good portion of the score on a city's competitive process can be like, how much money can you provide to the city in fees. So a last component here, I would say, is like pricing and subsidies. On universities, we see lower prices and higher demand, and those two things work together. So we're also seeing the growth of operational subsidies for e-bike only programs, which are more extensive, and we're seeing continued rider subsidies across all micromobility types, which would bring us more consistent with like a transit service where there's not 100% fare box recovery for a transit agency. The rider is paying a portion of that, but there's also state or federal tax money that's going into that. So these are 4 ways that we've been sort of working with universities that we think are good in everybody's interest, and we hope will show up more. So operational factors, 3 here. These are 2 pictures from our program at UC San Diego. So the first, it would be deployments and fleet size based on demand. And I show this picture on the right here because it's a good example of just how much demand we have on some of our university campuses. That's just scooters that have been parked and deployed there at UC San Diego. And there's a tendency to arise where sort of arbitrary either fleet caps or fleet minimums are put in place when if we're trying to provide a transportation solution. It's really important that we let demand drive that. A second point would be parking models that balance user experience, in this case with campus aesthetics. But we've been able to work with our partners at universities to iterate on what those models are. You can't really see it super well in this picture, but there is actually, sorry, it's not in this picture, but we've done different models of parking, from the charging hub solution to the painted boxes, the tactical urbanism examples, or using geofencing. And then a third example here would be campus-based operations, where we're working with our campus partners to base our operations out of the campus itself. And this is an administrative section of the UC San Diego campus where we were able to work with them to set up some charging facilities that again is in everybody's interest, because it puts our people on the campus, makes them more responsive to issues that come up, but also able to deploy more dynamically to meet demand, but also saves us costs because we're not paying people to drive back and forth between a warehouse, and it becomes a win-win. Third example, our third section here would be programmatic factors. And a few examples here, like on the labor front, we were able to work with the handful of universities to create what we called campus ambassadors. And we hired student employees and gave them 2 jobs. One was focused on like safety and education, continuing to educate and provide safety programming for the student body, in our interest, but very much in the university's interest as well. But then also able to do some operations work while out in the field. And that created a win-win. A bundled mobility options like mobility hubs and integrations with campus transit and other mobility providers. Those are the kinds of like partnerships and integrations that take time and work well, again, as part of those like longer term, true partnerships. But the sort of public-private partnership model that we have been doing with universities, we've been able to get a lot of this work done because we're in that true partnership. And then the third would be more direct integration into campus mobility planning. So like when universities conduct their transportation plans, that they're working with us to account for like how can micromobility be a part of the solution to achieve their goals. And a good example of this that came up was a new building is going in, a new residence hall is going in at one of the universities we partner with, and we're working with them to split the cost on discounted rates for residents who live in that building, which will have limited parking. And it takes time and trust to work through those kinds of deals, but we've been able to do it. And then this is just this picture on the right was part of a big promotion that we did really in partnership with UC San Diego, to where we were able to provide $10 of free credit to everybody on the campus to ride, and they had to redeem it. But then the university became a really strong marketing partner on this, and we saw greater uptake than we ever would have seen had we done this on our own. And we actually tracked the app downloads or the redemptions that occurred for this code based on day and time. And this is a freshman, this was a freshman orientation. And when the transportation director here took the time to get up and talk about micromobility as a solution and part of a solution for not owning or driving a car to campus, and said, we have a partner, Spin, who will provide this, free credit to get started. We saw everything, all the downloads spike. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Jon. That was excellent. Now I will introduce our next presenter, which is Dr. Joseph Schwieterman. Okay. Dr. Joseph Schwieterman is a professor and director of the Chaddick Institute of Metropolitan Development at DePaul University in Chicago. Schwieterman serves as the president of the Transportation Research Forum, a national organization founded in 1958. He has written 3 books on transportation topics published by prominent university presses, and has published extensively on both shared mobility topics and air, bus, and railroad topics. Dr. Schwieterman, I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen here a second.
Yep.
You can see my screen and hear me okay, right?
Yes.
Well, good to be part of this today. It's a topic I'm fairly passionate about, quite passionate about. Really enjoyed Dr. Ferguson and Jon's presentation there. And I'm in downtown Chicago, and we are a center that really tries to spread the word about best practices in transportation. And my institute, the Chaddick Institute, releases probably 3 or 4 major studies a year. We're right near the Art Institute, right downtown. We're also excited as president of the Transportation Research Forum to have a new chapter at LSU. And Dr. Hina Dashmana has been helping work on that chapter, which co-branded today's event. So we're really excited to have a presence down there. I'm going to tell you about a study we released somewhat, you might say, coincidentally, right when the pandemic hit, April 14th, 2020. And we've been working on updates since then about key takeaways about partnerships between public transit operators and transit TNCs, Uber, Lyft, via transportation, and others. So even this is not about micromobility, the topic's about microtransit. And I spend a lot of my time defending rideshare, saying there's a real role for it when there's a sort of a kind of a cultural pushback to Uber and Lyft, and we see there's a real potential here. So really enjoyed the previous two presentations because they stress just how much work it takes to get these partnerships, to reach their potential. And going to describe a little bit about that. Hang on a second here. See if I can advance my slide. There we go. Just so everybody knows, we're having the National Transportation Research Forum Conference in downtown Chicago in April. And just by chance, Friday is the deadline for proposals, and we give feedback on all presentations. And if we welcome practitioners to apply to do a practitioner presentation if you don't have a paper. And we expect probably 50 or so presentations, 150 people. We have tours lined up, and think about submitting, and just email me or look up the Transportation Research Forum and think about applying by Friday. But again, we are at a really cool location downtown. My address has a transit score of 100 and a walk score of 100. And but our region in Chicago has been slow to develop some of the innovations we're seeing around the country. So part of our study was motivated to try to get our big providers, the CTA, Rail Transit, Metra, to think about creative solutions with rideshare by surveying what's happening around the country. So what we did is we looked at programs in which rideshare, microtransit, and we looked at their attributes. We talked with program leaders around the country, with my co-author Mallory Livingston, and try to get under the hood a little bit to see what the public operators, a lot of municipal governments think about this. And then we looked at their audits and published reports. And I think in doing that, we allowed them to say things anonymously, to talk about how they moved up the learning curve with these partnerships, often that involved, say, using rideshare to public transit and getting a discount on the rideshare by having a special geofence code you could use. Other cases, these systems replaced bus routes that were canceled. And it's really exciting what we could see if the potential, if we learn from these examples. So we put things in three categories. And first, we call it first and last mile. And these are programs really that you augment transit by getting people to areas where the transit system just isn't very efficient or even non-existent. And we had 4 in that category around the country, both the East and West Coast. City of Arlington was one of the pioneers that they effectively built their own system using rideshare linked to the Dallas DART system. We also had services that came in response to service reductions. And this is where we're getting a lot of inquiries now from people, agencies saying, we just can't sustain all of these feeder bus routes that maybe just run once an hour or once every half hour. And we're careful to say our study is not to recommend replacing transit with these partnerships, but to maximize transit ridership by thinking creatively about the solution. So Dayton, Ohio is a good example of where they just couldn't sustain a route that had, I think, average of 5 people per bus mile, and they replaced the service with Uber and a Lyft option there. So I'll go through some of these as we go on. And then there's some other large programs focused on seniors. So the MBTA in Boston has a large program in which seniors can use rideshare for a nominal cost with a certain price cap. And they just found it's more effective than running paratransit vehicles that pick people up, and had pretty poor service, but they kept the paratransit, so that's still available. But they had Newton, Kansas, and Marin Transit rolled out services for seniors that were using basically TNC's rideshare as supplementing the paratransit system. So what we did to kind of get people's attention, it's hard to get people to read academic reports. I'm sure as Dr. Ferguson can comment, we produced kind of a practitioner-oriented takeaway study from this, in which we took found 21 key takeaways. And I'm just going to go through a couple of them to give you a sense of what we did. And one involves meeting federal regulations. And this was somewhat surprising in our analysis that we found that when these programs are rolled out for transit or cities to work with rideshare, there's often a lot of discussion about wheelchair accessible access. And we found that's a really important discussion. But in many cases, the demand for using these services, say you work with Lyft or via transportation, the number of rideshare requests was far below projections. And so what we found was often you didn't divert as many people from traditional paratransit programs as maybe you thought. And as a result, in some cases, the cost of running these partnerships was considerably less than what was anticipated because of the fact that the service requirements didn't involve as many special requests for wheelchairs as previously. So running these new partnerships in parallel with your traditional paratransit system seemed to work pretty well. In fact, you see here in the first couple of programs we had leading up to the last full year before the pandemic, a couple of these systems had none. And that was kind of a double-edged. King Metro had 400. And I think the key is we need to find ways to best serve the disabled community. And often these partnerships are not their first preference. And so improving paratransit really is important for that population, and to think of ways to market these services to the disabled so they take advantage of it. But this was a kind of a surprising result that the projections didn't match what actually happened. So in doing this, like Pierce Transit was able to extend their pilot because of the they didn't find out need as many accessible vehicles as they originally planned. They had two types of vehicles, and so that was one of our takeaways. A second one was the discussion about the trade-offs of just having a flat rate subsidy program in which you could ride rideshare and get a flat rate discount to go to transit. And we'll see there's a real trade-off. So it's very simple. Lyft and Uber and Via, if they have existing networks in their city, often can work with you to have, say, a $5 discount. And Detroit, we'll see, did that with quite a bit of success. Quite simple to do. People get a code, or there's a special, in some cases, a special app to use. But it comes at the expense of a lot of things if you keep it really simple like that, and you just tap into the existing rideshare network. Is one, you tend not to get driver and customer information. So you don't build a database of users because people are just out there using your code. And it's hard to set performance standards because you're just leveraging the existing rideshare network. But it's super simple in some cases. And to give you a couple examples with the flat subsidy option, it's kind of quite low cost. Here are some examples of the subsidies around the country. In St. Petersburg, Pinellas Transit Authority had $5 per trip reduction. In Boston, I mentioned this is a really generous program that seniors could ride Uber, I forget the partner they use, but one of the rideshare companies, up to $40 and have it paid for by the program. Detroit had this night shift program, $7 discount on rideshare trips, and Pierce actually paid the full cost, with some conditions. And so we find that these, if you just want to get in the game, can be a quite easy way to start. But as an example, we heard from Pierce Transit, that getting feedback from riders, you got to work through the rideshare company. Often they only had access to a small share of users, of those actually that use the phone line to book. So you couldn't get a list of people who had used the app. Sometimes there's confidentiality issues. So you sacrifice a little bit in terms of your ability to kind of aggressively manage the program. And so here's, and if Lyft is on the call here, I'm sure a lot has changed in the last year and a half. In fact, where we're starting the new round of interviews show that the two options are kind of blending together a little bit as the tech frontier advances. But if you choose to tap into the existing network on a subsidy per trip, you get 24-hour services. A lot of cases, there's some protection against driver shortages, but you don't get branded vehicles. You'd use existing vehicles. Some of the custom in-house service may not be there. Whereas say if you work with via transportation, which can be more expensive, where you actually have dedicated vehicles working at your for your program, all worked out in form of a contract. You subsidize them per hour. In that case, you get branded vehicles. So you can see up on the top, the Newton program, which was a last mile program. You have vehicles that build your identity, more in-house data and so forth. So the kind of trade-off is fascinating as to what's best for you. Another trade-off, I just got like 2 more I'm going to share of our 21. And this was, I think, kind of a reality check. When these programs first came out, we thought this is going to be a really hot ticket. People can use Uber to get to their transit agency, and there's going to be a lot of buzz, and the young people are going to instantly know about it. And they found that on the bad news side, it took a while for public awareness to really grow. And a lot of places have booths at fairs, and they have advertisements, and they post signs at the transit stations to get people to know about the programs. And some extended their pilot because they just needed longer to see the program build. That would be the bad news side. The good news side was that you did see steady growth leading up to the pandemic. And we're talking to them now, and a lot of the same customers are coming back. So here's an example of Pierce Transit up in the Pacific Northwest. What they did. So initially they had very low ridership. They did a mass mailer campaign. Then they went into Facebook, had a second mailer, hung signs at transit stations. Then they got an advertisements on Pandora, YouTube, and they saw this gradual growth of trips taken per month. And you can see, in fact, we got some new data before the pandemic. They were even rising more. And so it just takes a while to get the word out, to get data sets of your riders to, it's, requires kind of a little marketing savvy to get them to work. And so in Charlotte, they extended their pilot, which was designed to link people to the Lynx rail system through rideshare, to have more for marketing to take effect. Marin Transit did 2 6-month extensions because they really wanted to know and refine the system as ridership gradually built, and felt they needed a little more time. So the one of the last ones I'd like to share is that with these partnerships, we found that most governments, typically transit agencies or city and village governments, said you need to have like a regular call with your provider, and you need to have a steady line of communication. I appreciated John's comments that it may be best for a lot of places not to have 3 partners doing micro transit or micromobility, but to have one, so you can really work with them to refine. And so as we looked at this, we found that Marin Transit, for example, spoke to VIA about 3 times weekly during its launch phase. And after that, they talked to them weekly. So you don't just outsource the service and say, check back in 6 months, but you're constantly talking about that. Others had, direct responsibility in the transit agency to manage that relationship. And the people that did this found that their agencies, the rideshare companies, are really quite responsive if you, if you're constantly discussing ways to tweak. So Pierce Transit had this call every 2 weeks to assess queries and so forth. And so where do we see this all going? It's gotten so frequent now that our efforts to keep a data set of this, we're working some of the data of the Shared Use Mobility Center. So many of these partnerships are popping up everywhere that it's clear that post-pandemic, this is a hot thing. And we just see a lot more greater integration of on-demand programs with larger transit systems. Integrating fare payments, that's going to be a huge thing. We're already seeing that. So you don't have to necessarily go to the Lyft app or the Via app, but you can get on your transit agency's app and say, take me to my house, involving a rideshare connection, and do it in 1 click instead of 2. Other things about having be able to use your fund on your shared value, stored value card for transit. If you have a card with $20 of value on it, that can apply toward rideshare. We saw these 3 cities were working real hard to do that. King County did something kind of interesting up in Seattle. They installed these fare card readers on their on-demand vehicles, as I mentioned, so you could ride the rideshare and swipe your card and deduct your value from that. The branding is all there with Seattle Metro. Secondly, we see again more of this for paratransit, and it was really kind of shameful about how long wait times a lot of paratransit users have for rides. You know, will come between 12 and 1:30 at your house to pick you up for that shopping trip. That kind of uncertainty is really not acceptable for a lot of mobility impaired people. And so we see agencies supplementing that with these TNCs, and a lot more customer service comes with that. And finally, we see bigger partnerships emerging. We saw a few of those. Berlin has a gigantic partnership. Jersey City and New York launched something, and we see more of that to come. So thank you for the time to present, and I can do some questions at the end.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Schwederman. That was very informative. Okay, now I will introduce our last presenters, Alexander Kolpakov and Austin Scipiora. Okay, Alexander Kolpakov is a senior research associate at the Center for Urban Transportation Research in the University of South Florida. During his 20 years at the center, Mr. Kolpakov has been managing a wide variety of transportation-related research projects, focusing on primarily on evaluating alternative propulsion technologies and fuels, researching vehicle automation technologies, and performing transportation policy analysis. Mr. Kolpakov also serves as the director of the Tampa Bay Clean Cities Coalition, a joint project with the U.S. Department of Energy with the primary objective of reducing petroleum use in transportation. Mr. Kolpakov holds a master's degree in economics from the University of South Florida. And now, and also Austin Scipiora is a research associate with the Center for Urban Transportation Research. Her research primarily focuses on policy, planning, and evaluation of alternative fuels. She has worked on a variety of research in the area of alternative transportation fuels and energy efficient mobility. She also serves as co-director for the Tampa Bay Clean Cities Coalition and holds a master's degree in urban and regional planning and in global sustainability from the University of South Florida. Alexander and Austin, I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you for the introduction. Let me share my screen.
Okay.
All right. So our presentation today will summarize some of the findings of the recently completed study. It's called Micromobility Policies, Permits, and Practices. And the goals of this analysis were to investigate the state DOT's roles within, with managing micromobility. Also to look at the challenges and opportunities that state DOTs face in doing that. And review policies and procedures regarding the integration with other modes, data collection, equity, and so forth. So this study was funded by National Cooperative Highway Research Program, or NCHRP, and it started in early 2021 and was finally published in December of last year as NCHRP Synthesis 597. As for the research approach, the way we did that, we obviously looked at the literature research, but in addition to that, we also did an online survey of state DOTs. So the survey was administered in April-May of 2021. We've approached all 52 states, including 50 U.S. states, District of Columbia, as well as Puerto Rico. And we received 44 responses to the survey, and that's almost 85% response rate. In addition to that, we also did some more in-depth phone interviews with select 3 DOTs that you can see on your screen. It was Minnesota, Maryland, and North Carolina, and those were chosen based on some interesting projects that they had in their states, as well as their willingness to participate in that more in-depth conversation with us. So here are some of the findings of that study. The first thing that we've noticed is that the definition and classification of micromobility vehicles in state statutes plays a really important role in the way that these devices are regulated and treated on the road. Most states have a clear definition of bicycles in the statutes, but this is not the case for e-bikes and e-scooters. So most states define e-bikes and e-scooters as personal mobility devices, but there are 10 states that also define e-bikes and 4 states that define e-scooters as motor vehicles with the whole corresponding requirements. Additionally, e-bikes are sometimes not defined in some of the statutes. For example, this is the case in 2 states, and also e-scooters are not defined in the statutes of 4 states. So we found this really interesting. We've also noticed that over half of the states currently use a 3-tiered classification of e-bikes, even though not all the states are employing that system, but more and more of them are actually moving towards that classification. So the majority of DOTs do not regulate shared micromobility companies in their states directly. This is mainly done at the local level, either by counties or municipalities. And in over half of the surveyed states, municipalities are in charge of regulating micromobility. In fact, both shared as well as the personal micromobility. The most common actions that the DOT typically involved in is actually developing recommendations regarding the micromobility regulations. So DOTs are often asked to provide comments or feedback on proposed regulations regarding the micromobility. They also are involved in developing standards and also conduct research as well as perform data collection. We've also identified that over half of DOTs include micromobility in their statewide long-range transportation plan, which is obviously a good thing because they try to include that in their long-range transportation planning to make sure that they work together with other modes. There are different ways to regulate micromobility, and that can include the following approaches, either by state legislation or by local ordinances. As well as there are some other options like whenever you have both state and local level are involved. In fact, this was the most prevalent approach. Over half of the surveyed states employ some involvement from both the state and the local level. In terms of the enforcement of the regulations regarding the micromobility, again, the enforcement mostly occurs at the local level where the local agencies apply local ordinances, or sometimes local agencies can also apply and enforce state laws. But local agencies applying local ordinances is a more common approach. Over about 47% of states use that. Only 2 surveyed DOTs reported the enforcement that involves state agencies applying state laws. So this is clearly not a typical way of regulating. Over half of surveyed DOTs stated that DOT has no role in regulating micromobility at all. Some other roles that we've seen also involve establishing micromobility infrastructure design standards and also enforcing ADA compliance. As for the shared micromobility, the vast majority of DOTs that we've surveyed are not involved in regulating the operations of shared micromobility. And by operations, we mean issuing operator permits, determining the fleet size, hours of operation, and other operational requirements. So this is mainly done at the local level. But there were two DOTs that stated that they are involved in these types of regulations, but quite honestly, those were mostly outliers, because one was a unique case where the DOT was state DOT as well as the county DOT and city DOT at the same time. So this was District of Columbia. And another case was where the DOT was directly involved, was when the DOT regulated the micromobility only related to a pilot that was implemented at the state government property. So it did not really regulate micromobility all over the state. It was just limited to just a small pilot. The speed of micromobility vehicles is a key safety feature that can be regulated by different levels of government. So only 2 surveyed DOTs reported that they regulate the speed of micromobility vehicles in their state, while 14 stated that municipalities such as cities and towns regulate the speed of micromobility. Additionally, 10 DOTs indicated that both the state DOT and municipalities oversee the regulation. And also 10 DOTs stated that the speed is regulated or handled by other entities, including the state legislature, a combination of state, municipal, and county governments. Now, of those that are involved in regulating the speed, a large percentage of DOTs, as we mentioned, are not involved in setting the maximum speed for micromobility, but those that do regulate, here are some of the interesting information that we could learn from that study, is that depending on the type of the vehicle, the percentage of DOTs that do not regulate the speed varies from 23% for class 1 e-bike to about 82% for regular bicycles. And the maximum speed is not set by DOTs in almost half of the responding states for standing and sitting e-scooters. The most common maximum speed imposed by state DOT was either 16 to 20 miles an hour or 26 to 30 miles an hour. And one DOT interestingly reported that the maximum speed of all types of micromobility vehicles is limited to up to 55 miles an hour, which we found really bizarre. It seems like there's no regulation, speed regulation at all, since most of those vehicles will never go that fast. So note that this survey question that we used only asked about the maximum speed established by state DOTs. So the responses that are presented here do not really reflect the maximum speeds that may be established at the local level. Now, in terms of the safety requirements, 9 surveyed DOTs reported imposing helmet requirements for micromobility riders, and 11 said they have minimum age requirements for riding, and 2 DOTs also have rules regarding tandem riding on scooters. But at the same time, 13 DOTs have implemented other micromobility safety requirements. But the vast majority, over half of the surveyed DOTs, said that they do not impose any safety requirements on micromobility vehicles or riders. Also, you need to keep in mind that the safety of micromobility vehicles can also be addressed by combining micromobility regulations with the smart infrastructure approaches, such as complete street policies that focus on designing the entire right of way for prioritized use of slower modes of transportation, such as biking, walking, and also by reducing conflicts between modes. So they don't necessarily have to impose specific safety requirements to make sure that they address the safety issues. And with that, I'll turn it over to Austin. She's going to talk about infrastructure planning and other aspects. Austin.
Great, thank you, Alex. So we looked at considerations related to infrastructure planning. We found a little over half of our DOTs are not engaged in planning or operation or maintenance of infrastructure, while some, a little under 40%, are involved in some aspect of maintaining infrastructure for micromobility. That could include things like parking corrals, geofences, the sidewalks, paths, and some of the on-street infrastructure. We found, as kind of a general rule, parking of the devices are typically handled at the local level by those entities that are tasked with kind of that traffic control of that jurisdiction. We also found that in most of the states, it's the local municipalities who really play the key role in determining where those devices are permitted to operate, and also determining the service areas for those shared micromobility devices. We found about 11 states do regulate where these devices are allowed to operate. Next slide. We also asked considerations related to data collection. We did find that the vast majority of our surveyed DOTs do not require operators to collect or report any data on the operations of their devices. The few DOTs that do require data collection, they indicated they are primarily interested in data on things like the total number of trips, the trip length, if there was any crash data that involved the micromobility vehicles or devices, incident reports, injuries that could involve the devices, and other metrics. But again, that was related primarily to our DC DOT. We did find some common approaches shared among some states in terms of how data is collected. Arizona, Utah, and Wyoming indicated that they do collect and manage data primarily internally by their state DOT personnel. One of our DOTs in Connecticut outsources their data collection and data management to third parties. We found several others who stated that they worked with local agencies to gather this data, whereas a few others indicated that they used other methods or other ways to collect this data. Next slide. So one of the challenges that we noted in the literature associated with some of the shared micromobility services really focused on ensuring equitable access to this new transportation mode by all users. So we asked a couple questions about equity, and we found that the government entities that are approving these micromobility sharing pilots often do have policies in place that require those providers to make sure that equity is maintained or considered. However, this is mostly addressed by those local jurisdictions that are responsible for issuing those permits to the providers. We did find that 3 of the respondents, the DOT respondents, reported that they do have some policies in place at the state level addressing equity aspects of shared micromobility, while the majority, about 92%, do not. We found that several DOTs do implement equity policies for their shared micromobility users. What we found interesting is that most of our DOTs stated that equity issues are a priority for them, but very few of those actually have policies in place at the state level to address that. So to sum up some of the challenges we found with regulating micromobility, so we asked our DOTs to choose up to 3 main challenges that they face with regulating micromobility. We provided them with a list of challenges in the survey. Some of our top responses related to ensuring adequate safety to riders and pedestrians. That was followed by issues related to definition or classification of micromobility. And the third most common that we found was the ability to access reliable data on trips and incidences involving these devices. We found a few others cited challenges related to the fact that technology development is starting to outpace regulations. We found that some mentioned that ensuring that these micromobility modes actually improve the overall transportation system performance without creating additional traffic, and also the ability to kind of maintain uniform approaches to micromobility across various geographic areas. So as we mentioned, that was kind of a summary of our findings from our surveys. But as part of this project, we also conducted 3 interviews with select DOTs, and we just wanted to kind of share some of our highlights from those. Some shared that a really interesting point is that the bicycle and pedestrian counters that some use have difficulties actually distinguishing between a bicycle and a scooter. Certainly these counters can distinguish between a pedestrian and a bicycle, but to differentiate between a bicycle and scooter is much more difficult. It was stated that scooters are, because of this, are often counted together with bikes. They said this was primarily due to the inductive loops in the ground that actually measure, which reacts differently to metal distinguishing between bicycles and pedestrians, but it's not able to distinguish or register an e-scooter due to the materials that it's made of is different than a bike. We certainly found issues related to state preemption and a local rule in regulation. So in some states, state regulation overrides local, while in others, states indicated to prefer to stay out of those local regulations unless there's a strong reason to get involved. We found that some states are attempting to define or regulate micromobility based on how the devices or vehicles are used rather than their characteristics, such as speed, power, weight. Another issue that was brought up is, how do we accommodate all types of vehicles and devices on transit buses? At current, bikes are allowed while scooters are not, and this may affect integration with transit systems. Last thing that we just wanted to point out, another highlight, is the need to really have more description with crash reporting involving micromobility and really being able to identify the types of vehicles involved in that crash reporting. At the time that we did this, it seemed like most micromobility vehicles were often categorized as bikes in crash reports. Alex mentioned that during one of the meetings at TRB earlier this year, there was a discussion on a potential initiative to basically assign unique VIN numbers to each of the micromobility vehicles to help better identify those that are involved in crash reporting. Just to point out a couple of limitations and some additional considerations related to this research. So the results that we laid out in the synthesis, just want to note these are based on primary data collection through a survey of state DOTs, which certainly could have been impacted by survey design and could certainly be subject to other limitations with stated preference type of surveys. There's not an attempt to independently verify the accuracy of all the information that was provided through the survey mechanism in the interviews. Certainly, there was an attempt to find a balance between wanting to get useful information and then also needing to reduce our burden on our DOTs and giving us this data. So the survey was fairly short, and the questions were primarily multiple choice with some open-ended. The results in our study may lack some context and really only report from the state side, kind of lacking some of the maybe local explanations for certain approaches. Again, since micromobility is mostly regulated at the local level, our findings don't really fully capture kind of the full spectrum of policies, permitting practices that are implemented around the country to manage micromobility. As far as future research, we talk about shared micromobility as often being a solution to a first mile, last mile problem, or one of the solutions. But it may not be totally clear how well this can be integrated at the time with other transportation modes and potentially what impact it will have on these modes. Certainly, I know this is a topic of research right now and of great interest. We find that micromobility can certainly complement transit ridership and displace those car trips, but may also compete with transit and other active transportation modes. And certainly further research is needed to look at things related to micromobility on transit ridership, how it potentially affects congestion, energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, and the overall cost of travel in urban areas. So here's a link to the synthesis report, which, as Alex mentioned, was recently published. Just want to say thank you, and we welcome questions during the Q&A.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, thanks a lot, Alexander and Austin. That was excellent. Well, this concludes the presentation portion of our webinar. Now we will start receiving questions from the attendees. So we already have one question in the chat from Dr. Ina Dasmana. This is for all the speakers. Question. One second. Okay. This is for all of the speakers. Okay. And it says, in busier cities, I have seen that the e-scooters are casually parked in random places and are in the way of the pedestrians. Regarding direct accidents, is there any recent data available on e-bikes or scooters causing accidents on sidewalks, etc.? I have seen a few times 2 people riding an e-scooter. I'm assuming it's not a very stable setup. So maybe we can start it in the order that we presented to. I don't know.
I'll put a link. Thanks for your question. I'll put a link in the chat. UC Berkeley has a data map that shows where there's collisions that are usually pedestrian or bicycle related. So I'll put that link in the chat. But I think there's been some great improvements. I think that e-scooters blocking pedestrians is kind of is starting to become less of a problem after I've interviewed transit managers in the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area and San Francisco. Having the scooters have to lock to a bike rack or pole has greatly reduced them blocking traffic. So I recommend managers in other states to consider that rule, and they'll find fewer trip accidents and complaints. So I think that is something that's being solved. Also, geofencing. The lake around Lake Merritt in Oakland has a geofence. So your bike has to be locked on the opposite side of the lake so that it can't be easily tossed into the lake. So I think some cities are managing this well. So that's good news.
I'll jump into that. Yeah, I agree with all that. And yeah, I think scooters are an especially tough spot because they don't quite fit in some cases, of course, on the sidewalk where they're not legal. But a lot of roads don't have dedicated lanes, and they're not quite as visible as bikes because you're not quite up as high, and you know your trajectory may be a little more erratic. So I know there's been a lot of efforts to quantify how many accidents, medical visits we really do have. And some scooter another challenge is that they've tried to share hats or share helmets and found that was just kind of unsanitary. So there's some creative solutions to have helmets with disposable liners you can put in. But there's a lot of those kind of devil in the details questions that scooters have suffered from. And I felt this when we did some work on it. And we found that there was a lot of rage among scooter users with motorists who pass them at 18 inches, gap. The motorists are pretty revved up too. We were in the Chicago Tribune, and all these comments from the two sides started blowing up on the chat. And I could see there's a lot of sort of bad blood between motorists and scooters. So I think a lot is happening there with innovations about speed limits and geofencing. And if you go out of the geofence, your scooter slows down. But boy, it's a big question.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sherman. Alexander.
Well, I don't think I can add much to what has been said, but yes, some of those scooters on the sidewalks are blocking pedestrians or, wheelchair paths. I mean, that certainly is an issue. I mean, I should say that it was more of an issue a few years ago when those scooters just appeared. So it was all very chaotic. But I think now cities are starting to manage that a little better, because it all comes to enforcement, to be honest, because cities, they have the ability to actually put that stipulations about how and where those things can be parked. And if shared micromobility companies are not complying with that, they can pull the permit, and that happened in several cities. So it really comes to how the cities are willing, what cities are willing to do to actually manage that, and hopefully that's going to be a little bit more controlled.
Okay, perfect. We have another question that's also for all of the speakers. They're explaining their situation, right? It says that they're a senior pursuing a degree in civil engineering, and they currently have an internship in transportation. And there's someone that supports micromobility and public transportation, but lives in a state that's highly vehicle dependent, right? So it also has a strong and friendly culture to eco-friendly mobility ideas. So for someone who's starting their career, where should they be getting more involved to push for more micromobility ideas and more public transportation? It's kind of a big question.
I'll take a whack at that to start out with. That is a really interesting question. Let's say you're in, and I doubt the speakers are the writers in Wyoming, but if you take a state that's highly rural, there's certainly a lot less action happening, with college campuses probably being the exception. We are finding, though, in the public transit world, they're really eager to find people that are tech adept and can help move up the learning curve on partnerships with rideshare or on demand. So many cities and state governments are shifting bus service for rural populations. So on demand, where you have roving vehicles and that's really where tech skills can be really helpful if you have that. And not sure your civil engineering degree touches that directly, but you're obviously quite good with data and systems and so forth. Via transportation has also been a great first job for lots of people in the sector, where you manage partnerships. And I imagine some of that can be done remote now, with the way workplaces are changing. So it is a fun sector to get in, because all these things come together: tech, marketing, transportation, innovation. So yeah, think about that.
Okay. Do any of the other presenters have something to add to that, or should we go to the next question? Okay.
Go to the next, yeah.
Okay, yeah, let's go to the next. So the next question says, how do the various micromobility programs relate to the transit and the project communities? Do they have shared access in the app platforms for transit schedules and microtransit locations?
I'll jump in on this one. I put my answer in the chat, but I'll say in the San Francisco Bay Area, it's still a bit early for seamless connections between micromobility operators and public transit. And I will say one reason is the micromobility operators are, changing hats. They're getting bought out or have new directors. So some of those relationships are hard to sustain over different years as the actors change. But I think programs like the Mobility Hub grants help bring these stakeholders when there's like money on the table, and the potential to attract more transit riders if there is connection with micromobility. So I think these conversations are new and exciting. Maybe other cities have solved these problems. Cities like New York and DC and Chicago, transit is a big part of how they're moving. The BART system in the Bay Area has been very focused, starting in the 70s on cars. So many of our transit systems are, for commuters with big parking lots. So thinking about how can more nimble, smaller infrastructure for lighter EV micromobility vehicles, I think is exciting, and potential to reduce emissions is great. So I hope these conversations start to happen more as we look at cities like Berlin and Barcelona are solving some of these things. Denmark has Copenhagen, and the Netherlands have better infrastructure, and there's places to find some inspiration.
Okay, perfect. I have a question for you. Actually, do you have any projects, like, are there any case scenarios or case studies or actual projects where micromobility has been profitable? Like, which projects come to mind when I ask that question?
That's actually a great question, because obviously we're at a time now where there's been so many readjustments, layoffs at some of the big companies. I think, though, that it's pretty clear that, and again, we don't know exactly because most companies have consolidated income statements that lump everything together. But I am fairly convinced that some of the more successful scooter programs, if you look at Washington, D.C., for example, some of the big college campuses, and that the programs there are profitable. And when we did some work on it, we found that you really could be profitable, and don't quote me on this, but something like about 3 scooter trips a day. And that scooter can more or less pay for itself with the administrative costs. And if you don't have to pick the scooter up every night, and when Chicago had its rollout, you had to pick them up and replace them in the morning. If you can take away those costs, it's remarkable now, some of the improvements to scooters and how many trips you can get before the thing becomes obsolete. So I think that's pretty encouraging. Now, some of the larger questions about bringing them to marginal cities post-pandemic, things have certainly got tougher. But I do think scooters have shown that you can make a buck.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for your answer. Let's see if we have any other questions. Right now, no one has written it down.
I can jump in and answer your last question.
Yeah.
I think City Bike, especially before the pandemic, in New York was making a profit, and New Yorkers understand public transit, right? So it's a transit city. So thinking about how many, there's only like really 5 cities in the US that were designed to be transit focused. Chicago, DC, Philadelphia, Boston, New York. So those are places where people understand public transit. So cities more challenged, like Los Angeles or Austin, the South, transit, still car focused. So I think that's the tension we have in the US. But the #1 electric vehicle sold in the US in the last few years has been private electric bikes and scooters and just bikes, or family bikes. So I think the family e-bike is now, especially in the East Bay of Northern California, is really popular. Like, instead of big SUVs lining up at pickup, we have families with really sporty e-cargo bikes showing up, getting 2 kids with bike helmets. So I think that's super exciting, and potential. Kids love an e-bike ride, and if we have safe infrastructure, those families will be protected and could consider reducing their, instead of being a 2-car family, be a 1-car family. So I think some of those shifts, there is profit to be made. The micromobility is giving people kind of like the gateway drug, giving people a chance to try an e-bike or a scooter, so that thinking of a personal purchase with the rebates that are coming out across the US, I think is the potential for a shift. Post-pandemic, can we make a shift in how we're moving around? So that's what I think is exciting right now.
Okay. Thank you so much for your answer. And I see that there are no more questions here in the chat. So I think if there aren't any other questions, I would like to thank our presenters for the time and technical presentations. And I want to thank also all of the attendees. Please let me know if you have any questions about the webinar series and about Tran-SET. Also, I would like to encourage and to invite everyone to subscribe for Tran-SET email updates and keep an eye out for future Tran-SET webinars, which are organized every 3 months on different transportation topics, including transportation materials and traffic engineering. And well, having said that, thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Have a good one. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.